And maybe we could have a few questions. I see a hand here, and then we'll go down here.
When you consider the commonality and differences that exist in world religions, where do you see this in the future, say 1,000 years from now?
Great question. I mean, in a much more smaller and shrunken, globalized world today, I believe that there is a common denomination to all faith traditions. The golden rule is certainly common to all faith traditions. The ethics of not stealing, not slandering, not committing adultery, not et cetera, are common to all faith traditions. And I mean, I've also read books that talk about the spiritual, even theological common ground of most faith traditions. In speaking to close friends of mine who are deep practicing Buddhists, there is a belief in an absolute creator. They may not talk about the creator in the same kind of vocabulary we do, talking about a God, but they do believe in a God. But the vocabulary of different religions are different. So what we need today is to develop a globalized language on religion that, just as I said, the American Declaration of Independence is a religious document, not in the parochial sense, but in the substantive sense. I think we need to identify, for the sake of our future, what globalized religion means. What are the common traditions that we can draw upon? What is that common platform that we can build and yet have differences? And if we do that, and I believe we can do that, and make that and teach that and make it dominant as the belief platform, for lack of a better word, upon which all of humanity stands, I think that would be very beneficial for us in the future.
Question here.
You made one comment that was particularly striking to me in my understanding of religion, and also an issue in my field of study, which is political science, and that was conflict. You said that there's a conflict that exists today, and it's not between religions, but it's among the radicals within each of these institutions. I think we see that same trend in the American political climate today. So my question for you is, what do you see the evolution of Islam in American politics to be in the future?
I'm not so sure that, except to the extent that the way I described it, that I believe that our American polity recognizes the importance of religion, that the notion of a God, a creator, to whom we're all obliged to, is part of our societal contract. I believe that we need to look at it in a way that bridges the gap that many people of faith today, and perhaps over the last, say, few decades, have felt marginalized in American society in a way they had not before that. I think the 20th century was the century of atheism in a certain way, in a certain rejection of religion in many parts of the world, which has led to the pushback and led to the rise of a reaction, which we call fundamentalism, which began in the 20th century as well. And fundamentalism grew out of an antipathy towards religion. And I think that what America will do and is positioned to do, in a way that perhaps few other countries are, is to bring back a harmonious relationship between religion and state. Because to me, I don't like this. I don't like the vocabulary of separation of church and state has led to certain misunderstandings. What it really means, what it's really intended to mean, as I understand, is that the coercive powers of the state should not be used to oppress any religion, or to deny any person the freedom to exercise the religion of their choice or the beliefs of their choice, as long as it does not interfere in other people's freedoms. And defined that way, many Muslim societies will agree with that, because the Muslims began actually by virtue of protecting the rights of people to practice their religion. And I believe that a study of what was actually in progress at the end of the Ottoman Empire, which developed and was developing a jurisprudence and a system whereby different communities could actually fulfill their religious beliefs maximally within a pluralistic environment and a multi-religious environment, is the kind of thing I think we need to work out better in the American context. We already recognize, for example, that let's say our religious law deals not only with issues that are common to everybody, but Sharia law, for example, pertains to our dietary laws, to the way we worship, to the way we bequeath our inheritance. Under Islamic law, for example, no man or woman can disinherit a family member. I cannot leave all my property. I cannot leave in my will all my property to the Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and disinherit my children. This is forbidden in Islam. You can give up to a third to charity, but 2/3 of your property has to be given to certain family members. So there's no contradiction with American law to bequeath my will according to Islamic law, to eat the food I want according to Islamic law. Every society, we have kosher laws. We have a Beit Din here, which allows Jewish communities to deal with let's say, divorce and custody issues in accordance with their laws. There's no contradiction in doing that according to Islamic law either. Islamic law requires, for example, in a case of divorce, that custody of girls go to the mother, and of boys above the age of 7 or 10 to the father. There are certain things which are not contradictory to American law. So there are many aspects of the law which can be better integrated so that Muslims feel both fulfilled religiously and also and part of the American society. So when we look at the intersection of religion in society, be it in politics, be it in law, I think there is more that we can do to enhance the harmony between religious communities in America, be they Muslim, be they Christian, who feel, in many cases marginalized, with the state.
Please.
Thank you very much for being here with us. Much of what you've talked about sounds very similar to the Dalai Lama's new book, Beyond Religion, where he talks about a common system of ethics and values and the commonalities and that inside-out religion that you were talking about. One thing I found interesting that he says, though, is that he wonders whether it might not be a good idea to pursue a religion that isn't in the culture that you grew up in. And he talks about the common roots of culture and religion and how it's harder and may not be as effective to pursue a religion outside of your culture. I'm very struck that Islam, of course, transcends many cultures, from Southeast Asia to Arabia to Africa, and I wonder, about in Islamic tradition how people become converted to or join Islam if they weren't brought up that way, or is that not?
One thing I've learned is never to underestimate the creative capacity of God. but what I see happening is a globalization of the world. We're creating a globalized culture. I think to speak to the Dalai Lama's comment is that cultures are rapidly evolving, and they're rapidly becoming increasingly similar. 50 years ago, or when I was a young boy, we'd learn about different cultures in different countries, and you would see different architecture of homes, different ways of clothing. But now, whether you're Chinese, whether you're from Africa, we all wear Nike sneakers, they all wear, Levi's jeans, and they wear the same brands. So we're becoming more and more similar. So I think and yet it is true that religion exists in a culture. But I think what's happening is that we have to evolve a globalized culture today. I mean, to use a similar analogy, let's say maybe there was a time when in America there's a bigger difference between New York and Alabama and California. But as time goes on, I think they're getting less and less different. And we're seeing this at a globalized level, and I think there is a need to do this. And the reason why it will work is because every 33 years or so, a generation of human beings dies, a new generation is born, and a new generation comes into power. So societies change. I mean, within a century, 100 years from now, nobody who is alive today will be alive, typically speaking, statistically speaking. But 100 years from now, there will be human beings, our children and grandchildren, perhaps. And that's how societies will change. So societies will change not only because individuals change, but because a whole crop of human beings are alive who were not alive before. So those of us who are locked into our cultural traditions, who are locked into our prejudices, will eventually die off. And those who are coming on, new on the scene, who have a much broader range and view of things, will see things very differently than you and I do. So if we are to prepare ourselves for a future different than our own, then I think we have to start thinking and leading the discussion and the discourse around how we can do this. And I believe that the data is within us. And I mean, I've read books in my earlier days about, the underlying spiritual perspective of all that underlies all religious traditions. So if we access that data and package it and present it in a way that speaks to both our own individual traditions, but also creates a platform for what you might call a globalized religion, I think we have made an important step. And to me, I mean, when I experienced God, I became universal. I became global. When I realized that the essential Feisal was not my physiology, was not my emotions at that given point in time, when I realized that the essential I, the perennial and eternal Feisal, who was complete as such, lay in my soul, then I began to look at my cultural surrounding, just as whether I'm wearing a suit or a thawb in Saudi Arabia or a sarong in Indonesia, and I could go to these cultures and don a different outfit and feel comfortable in my own skin. It gave me that power and that freedom. And I believe that if we are able to teach people, and we can teach people, that experience, which is really commensurate to love, because then the meaning of loving God, the first commandment of our faith tradition is to love the Lord our Creator with all of your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength, and to love your neighbor as you love yourself, takes on a whole new dimension. And I think that is going to be the basis of a common faith tradition.
We have time for maybe one Question, Mohammed?
You spoke very movingly about the notion of experience and the primacy of experience. Yet at the same time, the human being is the only being that can delude himself as well too. So what is the possibility, or what is the safeguard in not going in that direction and trying to seek that particular experience of God that you speak?
I apologize, I didn't quite understand the question.
I said you speak very movingly about the notion of primacy of experience and
Yeah.
spirituality.
Right.
Though, but the human being can also delude himself as well too. So what is the safeguard there to prevent that particular occurrence? That's what I'm asking.
We just have to police ourselves. I mean, it's a question of I mean, one of the things, as you said, we do delude ourselves. And the Quran says it. It says, you know, have you seen the person who deludes himself into thinking that he's doing right while he's doing wrong? I mean, when I read that verse, I said, how do I know that I'm not deluding myself? I constantly have to, you know, check myself. And unless we check ourselves, it's a very, very easy, because Satan is very clever, very smart, and, you know, and we do get deluded, and we often, you know, realize, oh my God, I had this conception all along, and this was, you know, a misconception that I was operating under. I think we always have to have a certain mistrust of ourselves. This lady has really a question, so let's... we can take all questions in one shot, and then we'll just give one final answer. We can do that too. Was the gentleman had a hand up as well? Okay, go ahead.
You talked before about how religion and government need to work together by, like, the government not repressing any religion's ability to follow their traditions and beliefs. But kind of inversely, how can we make sure that individuals in the government don't try to pass, like, restrictions on anyone's beliefs based on their own values, like in such cases of homosexuality or abortions?
Well, there will always be boundary problems. In physics, we call them boundary problems. Okay, you'll always have boundary problems in ethics. There are always moments or times when a given law has its limits, and those are the parts which are challenging and difficult. But I believe that in cases like that, more thinking, and this is where interfaith dialogue can be helpful as well, because when we share our own traditions and experiences, we begin to see how these issues can be thought of in a new way. I mean, I grew up thinking of gender as being black and white, and yet at an early age, I also learnt in our cultures of people who had mixed gender, you know, and then I discovered in my study of Islamic law even recognizes them. Because under Islamic law, in inheritance law, the male gets twice the female. The books on inheritance law speaks about transgenders. Okay, Islamic books written 1,000 years ago dealt with this. How do you deal with the inheritance of a transgender who exhibits both male and female characteristics? And what's interesting about my reading of these law books is that the concern of the jurist was always about justice. It was, how do we apply the law so that everybody gets their rights? Now, if under Islamic law we acknowledge that every human being has rights, and one of the 6 objectives of Islamic law is the right to a family, and what do transgenders have in terms of family rights? How do we? I think the time has come for Muslim jurists to reopen this discussion in the area of family law. And then, from my readings about gender in the last 30 years, I've come to realize that even psychologists have identified a difference between male and female brains even. There are people who have male brains and female bodies, and vice versa. and that these explain certain behavioral traits. Now, because traditional laws were crafted and thought through, given the knowledge of the time, with the knowledge that we have in our time, we need to then incorporate, which is why even, let's say, decisions on medical ethics, as we call them today, or bioethics. When has a person died? Do we keep this person alive as a vegetable? When is the moment of death? Muslim scholars have agreed to take brain death as indicative of actual death. So in dealing with those issues I think relate primarily to issues of law versus religious law, you might say. And even within our religious tradition, as a Muslim, there are differences of opinion on the case of abortion, for example, as to when does the soul enter the fetus. And even within Muslim law, there are different schools of law. There are those who say in the beginning or within 40 days, and there's even, based on that hadith of the Prophet, that the soul enters the fetus at 120 days. Which is why under one of the classical schools of jurisprudence of Islamic law, an abortion committed in the first trimester is not considered murder. So we even have this variety of interpretation within my own tradition, let alone an American tradition where you're dealing with other religious traditions. Now, how do we do this? How do we create a society where what is considered legal or illegal is considered acceptable with the whole society? I don't know the answer to that question. But I do know, for example, that in India, for example, although Islam is against the practice of sati, which, under Hinduism, when a husband dies, the wife has to throw herself in the funeral pyre. But in some cases, Muslim rulers over Hindu minorities tried to prevent that. But in others, they did not, because it was, to use an American terminology, a violation of church-state separation. If this is a religious practice of that community, how far do you go in allowing that community to practice its tradition within its community without penalizing them for that? So these are things I think that our jurists have to look at. I'm allowed to practice my dietary laws in this country without, violating anybody else's right. How far do we go in giving religious communities the right to practice their laws within their communities, provided it's only within their communities? This is what the Ottomans did. They had actually different religious communities could have different courts on different issues, just as we have here the federal courts, the state courts, the county courts, municipal courts. They had also a system where you could have your case heard in a Christian court, if it was a Christian versus a Christian, or you could have it in the overall court. So there were choices of how you could have your case heard depending upon the issue between the plaintiff and the defendant. If they agreed to have their case heard with a particular kind of a law, then that will all be considered binding. So that's why I'm saying, looking at the experiences of what the Ottomans were doing and actually evolving towards doing, it's a very sophisticated system, may be a help in helping us develop an American jurisprudence that will fit our faith communities, not only Muslims, Christians, by the way, who believe very strongly in biblical law, that would allow them the feeling that they're to feel more fulfilled in their own religious practice.
Anne-Marie, I think maybe this will be our last question.
Okay, well, I just want to say thank you again so much for coming and lecturing with us this evening. But as someone who is a religious leader and someone who's very prominent in the field of interfaith dialogue, I was wondering if you happen to have any advice for the next generation, such as myself and other students that are here, who may be hopefully one day contributing more to interfaith dialogue. If you have any words of wisdom or anything that you've learned through the successes or maybe the failures.
Yes. The short answer first is in my previous book, What Start With Islam, there's a whole section there, I think in chapter 6 or 7, on interfaith dialogue. And I wrote that spent a lot of time on that particular section, which I recommend to you. read a lot, study different religions, get to know different religions, really study them, and know them from the inside. Maybe try even to practice them. I mean, I went and practiced Buddhist meditation. I went to masses. I mean, I think it's wonderful to really explore and understand the genius behind every religion, the signature of a religion, the emphasis of every religion, because you will get a sense of what makes that religion tick, and you'll be able to speak, just like learning a different language helps you. I mean, learning a different language doesn't make you lose your own language. It makes you understand your own language better and understand. And sometimes you will use a Latin expression. Sometimes you use a French expression because it expresses the exact sentiment you want to express better. So when you know different languages, you actually understand your own language better. The same thing with religions. The more you understand other religions, the more you'll understand your own religion better. And the more you'll be able to engage with other religious communities because you can speak their language. You understand how this makes them tick. When Jesus says, "I am the truth and the way and the life," I mean, that's a profound statement, very important. But there is something about that which is true in every faith tradition. But when a prophet says that, when a messenger of God says that, it has a meaning and a significance which is actually universal. It may have been expressed in one faith tradition, but you'll see how it resonates within other faith traditions as well. So it enables you to be a bridge figure in a much more effective way. Thirdly, develop friendships with people who are of different faith communities, because those friendships count a lot. So on the basis of those friendships that you will build the common and globalized religion, which to me will not be a fusion of different religions, but will be a platform on which all religions stand. God bless you, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming this evening. There are books for sale out front. I'm going to take Imam Feisal out there to sign books if you have interest in having your book signed. Thank you.